The question was, why can't I handle compliments or praise? When someone says I'm funny, generous, or thoughtful, I can't help but remember times when my jokes fell flat, when I didn't stop to help someone, or how self-centered I can be. When someone says I'm smart, I can't help but think about the times I felt like an idiot, made poor choices, or realized I didn't know as much as I thought I did about a topic. When someone says I'm friendly, I can't help but remember the times when all I wanted to do was go home and imitate a mushroom growing in a gloomy corner, or times when I've been so nervous I can't hardly stand to be in my own skin. I can't help but remember how hard it is for me to make a new friend or even remember how. It's not necessarily that I feel inferior to other people, so much as either I feel undeserving of praise or I simply can't help but remember times when I wasn't a good example of that praise. This is a very moving reveal from this reader, and I think we all can learn from what he or she is saying. It's very, very easy to stay in the negative. It's very easy to refocus, dismiss, to ignore and dismiss something positive that something says about you and refocus instead on what wasn't okay. And I actually do this myself. Sometimes I'll mess up like I just mentioned with the headphones, and that happened weeks ago. No one remembers that except me, but I remember that. And I might over focus on it. And I notice that people with ADHD often over focus on their mistakes, or they eat away at them, or they just come together in the background to form this backdrop of what I do wrong. And we have got as adults living with ADHD, not just to shift our focus to things that we're doing well. It's that fifth C of my 5 C's celebration, but to help kids shift their focus. Our brain is wired to pay attention to what isn't working. That's how we adapted to survive. That's our negativity bias. We remember what isn't working. So hopefully, as we were evolving, we didn't repeat those mistakes. But now what happens is that people hold on to those even though they're not serving us. And what I've found a lot is that people, adults with ADHD, have these negative conversations or self-conceptions that have hung around since childhood that actually don't really fit with who they are as functional and well-meaning and kind and loving adults, but they're still playing those tapes. So the question is, how can we stop playing those tapes? How can we change the tape, or at least how can we pause the tape long enough to offer an alternative? And this is what I want to talk with you about. I'm very curious. What do you do today in your life to try to shift that tape? How do you press pause? How do you help your kids press pause? One of the things that has to happen is that you actually take in something good someone says to you. And this means shifting your focus and instead of minimizing it, holding on to it. And since many people with ADHD struggle with working memory or process or slower processing speed, sometimes good stuff goes by and it's completely not absorbed. Their working memory doesn't hold on to it because they're waiting for the but. You did a great job, but I liked how you, but they're waiting for that because in childhood there were so many instances, and probably in adulthood, where people start with something positive and then they give you the corrective and then they try to end with something positive. It's that sandwich model. Oh, it's okay, to hear something negative about yourself if it's something positive at in the top and something positive at the bottom, when in reality it doesn't feel okay at all any time. And so we have to help the people around us learn how to give us feedback so that we can actually understand and metabolize it. You know, my mom, who loves me very much and is very proud of me, watches sometimes when I'm on Facebook. If you're watching, Mom, hi. And one of the things she does is she'll call me and she'll say, "That was really good, but there was like an inch of space between where your shade ended and the windowsill started, and that was distracting." So, did I hear the part about being good? Of course I didn't. What I heard was about the space between my windowsill and my shade. And so, what I said to her is, "Mom, you know what? I'd like to hear the good stuff. If I want to hear the bad stuff, I'll ask you about it. If I want to hear feedback, I'll let you know. But first, I have to take in the positive thing that you said, and that can be hard enough." So another person writes, "My kids and I all have ADHD. I have really struggled with distance learning and working from home. I became upset more easily with every setback and was short with my children for struggling with the same things that I was struggling with. Of course, our children are our mirrors and we are theirs. It's not fair, but I felt a sense of shame because I wasn't as patient as I could have been with the kids. My personal feelings of failure got in the way of being the best mom example I could be for my kids. I've struggled with being resilient in the face of chaos." So one thing that I think this woman is doing, this mom is doing that's so important is she's being accountable. She is owning her side of the street. And that's incredible modeling for our kids and nothing to be ashamed of. Actually, it's everything to be proud of. Part of having a growth mindset is being able to take chances, mess up, and learn from those chances rather than poop on ourselves about those chances, right? Harlan's writing, "Yeah, we now call it the SH blank T sandwich. It's been so overused and it doesn't work much nowadays." It doesn't really work. What works better is actually keeping the positive feedback and the constructive feedback completely separate. Because if you want to take in the positive, if you want your kids to take in the positive, just do that. That's the celebration. We're noticing, we're acknowledging, we're validating efforts in the process of doing an effort that actually accomplishes a goal. We're saving our feedback about what could be different, i.e., better, for another time. Otherwise, that constructive feedback contaminates the positive and essentially erases it. And so it's very important that you start to learn for yourself, to decide for yourself, how can I best take something in that someone says to me that's nice? Can I write it on a post-it and put it on my computer so I could look at it? If I get an email from a supervisor that tells me I did a good job or my review is positive, print that out so you can hold it. You can look at it when you're having a bad day. We have to contradict that negative voice in our heads, and it is hard to do. It's not something we do naturally. So we have a few comments. Um, uh, Ashley says, "I have lived in shame and negativity for years from the mistakes I made or not feeling like I fit into the society's box of normal. Until I found a great therapist 2 months ago. She is coaching me to stop focusing on what mistakes I made and focus on my project." Amen, sister. I love this therapist. "I am 33 years old and now have two younger children with ADHD, and my oldest daughter is not. I'm learning how to control my symptoms and involving my kids in my healing so they know it's okay to feel what they feel and not be ashamed, and we learn this together." That is so beautiful. Thanks for sharing. You know, one of the things that happens when we're kids is we are essentially guided to and sometimes forced to go along with things that don't necessarily feel comfortable to us or make sense to our brains or things we want to do. And particularly for brains with ADHD, it's very hard for you and to work up the motivation, the initiation to do something that's not inherently rewarding because ADHD brains lack dopamine. So this means that if we're in a situation where someone is telling us to do something that's essentially and inherently harder for you to do, because you have ADHD, you are going to struggle not just with the motivation, but you're going to struggle to adapt to the way that you're being told to do it, because often the way that you are instructed to do something doesn't take into account having a uniquely wired brain. And this is really critical, not just for people who have ADHD, but for all people who are outside the box thinkers, those with learning disabilities, those with are high functioning on the autism spectrum, those with anxiety. People want to have a say in how they do things. And we need validation that sometimes our ideas, in fact, many times our ideas, not only make sense, but they could work. And what happens to a lot of kids with ADHD as they grow is they're told that their way of doing it, their outside the box thinking, their unusual methodology or different approach isn't the right way. And so as soon as they get that message, what happens is that they internalize something, and that something is, I'm not doing it right. And what goes along with I'm not doing it right is, I'm wrong and I don't feel good about myself. It doesn't feel good to be wrong. It's hard for kids to accept being different. No one really wants to be different because different means, it's not different, particularly means when you're a teenager or a tween, not as good as. We have to shift that. And we shift that, as Ashley said, by monitoring ourselves, by shifting for ourselves. I think it's really important at the end of every day for adults to write down 3 things that went well that day. Anything. Keep a little notebook next to your bed and write it down. Force yourself to write it down, even if it's super mundane. We have to build up the positive to start to at least, bring a little bit of balance to what's going on inside our heads. So, Harlan says, about 30 years ago, I learned to make an end of day list, not to do for tomorrow, but what I got done for today. Bravo. I love this. I do my to-dos in the middle of my day. A simple thing, but I found the last thing in my brain haunted my sleep. Listing accomplishments made me happier, and that carried into my sleep. Beautiful. I love that idea. So what he's suggesting is that at the end of the day, you write down, what did I do today? What did I get done? It's a version of those 3 good things that happened every day. And then in the middle of the day, you create your to-do list for that day, or perhaps at breakfast, rather than trying to do it the night before. For some people, particularly people who have anxious brains, and I have one of those brains, I sometimes need to write down what I want to do the next day, the night before, so I'm not thinking about it, particularly at like 3 o'clock in the morning when I wake up to use the bathroom. Oh, what do I have to do tomorrow? Don't want to do that. So I write it all down, empty it out. I put it in with kids. When I do this, I call it the worry motel. We check out, we fill out different pieces of paper for different rooms, so to speak, and they can put their worries in a safe place. Tomorrow you can pick them up, read them, own them back. Susan asked a question, is ADHD at different levels in some people, some more than others? Absolutely. It's not like diabetes. You have it or you don't. It's not like, excuse me, I meant to say it's not like pregnancy. You're either pregnant or you're not. It's more, in some ways you can say like diabetes. You can be mildly diabetic, you can be more moderately diabetic, or you can be a severe diabetic. And it's the same with ADHD. There's a whole range of symptoms, symptomology, and intensity. New question. Whenever I am asked to list some good things about myself, I always draw up a blank, which then stresses me out. I always end up thinking, oh, then they'll say I'm, rather than thinking I am. So what this person is saying is that they think outside about what other people are thinking about them rather than what they're thinking about themselves. I call this double outside thinking, and I'll explain that in a minute. I know we are always our own worst critics, but it's still a bit distressing. When asked, "Who are you?" as a person, I can't think of any answers. Does this happen to any of you? What a great question. Does this happen to any of you? If someone says, "Who are you?" do you know who you are? Can you say some things about who you are? I'd love to hear who you are. So take a minute right now and tell me in the chat, in the message box, who are you? And hopefully, you'll have some positives along with perhaps some of your more challenging traits. So when I talk about this double critic, you're thinking about what someone outside of you is thinking, and in that way, you've now moved from your own critic to now a twice as intense level of a critic. So you're not only your own critic, you're now the critic of your critic in a way. So I'm thinking about myself and what I don't do well, and then I'm thinking about what someone else is going to think about me that I don't do well, and sometimes it goes even further than that. This kind of thinking is so incredibly toxic. First of all, we have no idea what other people are thinking about us. We can't read minds. All we can do is listen to what people say and try to understand their facial expressions and their behaviors. Secondly, some people, I am not one of these people, but some people are super good at disguising how they really feel. I'm one of those people since I was a child. You can tell how I'm feeling. I wear my heart on my sleeve. You hurt my feelings, my eyes are going to fill up with tears. You'll know, or my face will get flushed, right? So I don't actually, I'm not someone who, you can't tell what I'm thinking. You pretty much know what I'm thinking. But there are many people who are much better at this. Generally people who don't have ADHD, but not exclusively. And so if we try to make a judgment about ourselves that we think someone else is making, you can see how this is kind of crazy thinking. We want to stick with what we think about ourselves and any kind of direct feedback that we get. Heather shares, "I'm a single mom who loves animals, especially cats, and I am a good listener, and I believe Black Lives Matter." Thank you so much. Kidder says, "I'm so happy today because somebody restored your relationship within 48 hours. I want the world to know that Dr. Akpada is powerful and he is good in restoring broken relationships, and you shared the contact information." Thank you, Kidder. Please take our polls in the discussion section of this Facebook event so that I can get a sense of what's going on with you. Um, and Harlan says, "A double bind," yes, that's like that double critic, "is that giving yourself self-rewards, even if it's factual, is egotistical. It can be hard for some folks." Yes, so there's this line between having positive self-esteem and feeling like you're all that, right? There's a line between I believe in myself and I think I'm the hottest person there is on the planet. I'm smart. I'm the best at this. I'm not talking about narcissism. And I honestly feel like a lot of people with ADHD have so much negative thinking about themselves that they're probably swinging relatively far away from that egotistical, narcissistic end of the spectrum. What I'm talking about is believing in yourself, seeing some of your genuine positive qualities, nurturing those, and holding on to them, because the world will give you enough challenging feedback. Asma says, "My son is 11 years old with ADHD. He likes to be alone and enjoying himself. He makes his life alone, little friends, and doesn't care if he has anyone here or not." That can be pretty hard to witness as a parent. A lot of times, kids who may not feel good about themselves are afraid to take a risk, to reach out and interact with another child. And what they might benefit from are, and I don't know how to do this right now in COVID, except if it's outside, are small family get-togethers where your family and another family with a child near your child's age or someone who has been friendly with your child get together so that you can help facilitate playing a game or an activity. He's probably struggling with how do I get started. He may not care, or he may act like he doesn't care because he's afraid and he lacks confidence. Nylish says, Namaste to all. Namaste. Should we tell our boss employer about ADHD? Is it covered by the ADA Act? That's a that's a personal decision, but I do believe that ADHD is covered by the ADA. It is a disability, particularly if it's a documented disability, a learning disability. So Jill says, my son has ADHD, and while learning about ADHD, I've come to believe I've had it all my life as well. Wow, good for you for looking at it and owning it. The problem is my husband, who doesn't really get that you can't help some behaviors. Any advice on how to help him understand? He can be very hard on my son, who is 9. Jill, this is a great question. So when we're in a parenting dynamic, and one parent has ADHD and the other parent doesn't, it's often very difficult for the non-ADHD parent not just to empathize with the ADHD parent, but also with the child. Because what happens is the things that annoy the non-ADHD parent about the ADHD parent often annoy them about their child. It's very difficult to see their child engage in behaviors that you don't understand and that feel foreign to you. And to me, there are two important solutions. One, education. Help your husband find a way to learn more about what it's like to live with ADHD. Don't want to be shamelessly self-promoting, but that's what my book is about. What kids with ADHD wish you knew. There's a lot of resources on attitude about this, and I think it's important to try to clarify, to help your son and your husband understand what your son's experience is like. For a lot of neurotypical people, they don't understand that some things can be within a child's control and some things cannot. So education is the first thing. The second piece is compassion. You have to help your husband understand that your child is doing the best they can with the limited resources they have available to them at any given moment. We all are doing that. But for kids with ADHD whose frontal lobes lag in maturity up to 3 years, you may have a 9-year-old son who in many ways acts like a 6-year-old. It's compassion that's called on right now. So let's see. Chloe says, I don't feel as though my shame relating to my ADHD comes from receiving negative feedback, such as a child, adult, or such. So I'm always confused as to where it comes from. I feel like I hold myself to such a high standard, and I always feel extremely negative about myself as I'm aware of my difficulties. I'm autistic, I have OCD and ADHD. I'm aware that these difficulties have made me a difficult person to live with. I'm throwing that word right out of your vocabulary. You have challenges. Everyone has challenges. You're not difficult. You have challenges. And I've been to live with in the past. Prior to diagnosis, I feel that things are better and have more understanding. And I've always had a pervasive feeling that I've let my loved ones down in various ways. That can be extremely stressful and heart-wrenching to read, actually. So thank you for sharing that, Chloe. I think we really have to reframe this word difficulties into challenges, because everyone on the planet has executive functioning strengths and challenges. Only when you're a kid, the message that you get is that you are difficult, that something is wrong with you. And as you mature, particularly through adolescence, and adolescence can be brutal, we know, and sometimes childhood can be cruel, you receive feedback from people that you're different. And because you're not like they are, because you may struggle with flexibility, because you may be more rigid in your thinking, because you may have less emotional control, or you're not particularly organized, you are less than. You are not less than. You are different. Debbie Reber talks about differently wired. You are wired uniquely. And it's important that you work on what you like about yourself and what strengths you have, and you shore those up. And if you need to put a Post-it on every mirror in your house about a few things you like about yourself, I encourage you to do that. What I want to say to you, Chloe, is you recognize that you have some challenges and some limitations. That is incredible. That is a strength. And the fact that you've worked on it is a double strength. Bravo for you. I can't congratulate you enough. So I want to say, give yourself a pat on the back. Celebrate yourself. You're learning and growing. You know, my mother, who I mentioned before, has this expression: if I wake up and I'm not touching wood, it's a good day. And it's not a good Jewish mother expression. And what I think about, and what she says is, you know, like, if I'm alive, I'm learning. And that's one of the major incredible things about my mom. And I don't know why I'm talking about her so much today, but I guess she's in my thoughts. And I have that kind of approach as well. If I'm living, I'm learning. That's why we're here, right? That's part of our path. Um, Poland says, please advise about ADHD medication. My 10-year-old son can't stay on a task, never finished his homework. So Poland, could you let me know what kind of advice about medication you're looking for? That would be helpful. Ashley says, I'm compassionate and empathetic. I used to think that this was a weakness, but now I see it as a great strength. Bravo! Because it takes a strong person to put yourself in someone's shoes. It sure does. People who are not empathetic are weak, much weaker than those who can make an effort to see what it's like. And I believe that people who grow up, who are outside of the box thinkers, have this strength. They know what it's like to walk a singular path, and that's a great asset. She goes on to say, it's strength to be open and see things from a different perspective than your own. Yes, and to also recognize there are many perspectives, right? That's super important. Cynthia asks, is there a vitamin for kids that helps with ADHD? So, there are a lot of resources on attitudemag.org. .com, excuse me, about alternatives to help kids with ADHD, you know, and including different kinds of vitamins. So I encourage for you to check that out. I am aware that there's been a lot of research on fish oil, which can be very good for the brain. So I would encourage you to check that out. Sarah asks, my 11-year-old just saw a psychologist for depression, which runs in the family, but is surely linked to the challenges of living with ADHD. She's never been medicated before, but the suggestion was to try Strattera as it would help both ADHD and depression. I'm concerned about the side effects, but more concerned about the depression. Would appreciate your thoughts. So I'm not a medical doctor. I'm a psychologist. I've had some clients have a lot of success with Strattera and some clients who don't. I think it's really important to treat depression in kids, particularly kids with ADHD. We want to try to help them climb out of the hole that they're in as soon as possible and effectively as possible. And a lot of times when kids with ADHD are depressed, they can't kind of hear or absorb the interventions that we're working with them on in improving those executive functioning skills because they're feeling so badly about themselves. So when they can start to feel a little bit better, and sometimes this really is biochemical. I've had several clients during the course of this shelter in place who sunk into a deep depression because of social isolation, not working, not seeing friends, struggling with online learning. And a few of them actually started an antidepressant, and it made a difference. It didn't make things go away, but it made them more available and willing to try some techniques and tactics for change. So I would like to ask my team who is helping me if there's any results from the poll, if you would post those in the comment, because quite honestly, or tell me how to look for them. I'm not sure. Jim says, my husband wants to hold back my 8-year-old daughter, ADHD and dyslexia. She's in 2nd grade. She's socialized and a happy girl. Her academics weren't bad. What do you think about holding her back? I'm afraid of hurting her feeling. Okay, I'm going to take a stand here. I'm not really in favor of holding kids back, particularly if they're doing well socially. I've had kids I've worked with who are held back, and doesn't really do anything good for their self-esteem. I much prefer getting kids the academic support they need, including if that means in the summer, and tutoring to bring them up to speed. I'm working with a child right now who was at an alternative school for a few years and is 3 years behind in math and is working doing Khan Academy with a tutor over the course of the summer to catch up a bit. I think that's much more effective. When you hold a child back, particularly in second grade, it's different than having them do kindergarten twice. At this point, they're established socially. They understand that everyone is going on to third grade and they're not, and that can do some lasting damage to their self-esteem. Mary Beth says, I have SPD, dyslexia, ADHD, and Lyme disease. I'm struggling not to feel hopeless. Oh, Mary Beth, of course you are. That is a lot to carry around. So, you know, how do you manage all those things at the same time? I'm assuming you're working with your doctor to try to improve this. I would encourage you to set smaller goals for yourself. Earlier on, someone talked about expectations, and I want to come back to that in terms of the relationship for shame. You know, we're in a doing society. We can always do more. We can always do it better. We've got to keep going. We're all the Energizer Bunny. And in reality, people get tired. People need to restore. People need to refuel and rejuvenate. And particularly, Mary Beth, when you have multiple issues going on, life is going to be more challenging. You need more time to execute things, to understand things, and that's okay. You know, take the time you need. There's nothing wrong with saying to someone, I'm not sure about that, let me get back to you, or I want to think about that. Okay. Nylish says, I've been taking organic plant-based supplements, omega-3 and multivitamins for the past 15 years, and I was on Ritalin but stopped due to side effects. My daily routine is exercise, meditate, and yoga. Congratulations. That's wonderful. I'm glad that's been helping. Nomi asks, special ed teacher here. Thank you. And mommy of a 7-year-old with ADHD, you mentioned empathy. I'm trying to understand my son. He and his sister broke the laptop during distance learning. I'm really sorry to hear that. Sister gets it. He understood that it was wrong. I sat at the dinner table crying, and he sat across from me eating a peanut butter sandwich, totally oblivious. Later on, sister writes an apology letter. He comes by and draws me a picture of the desert. Why does he seem so disconnected? P.S. I love your book. Thank you, Naomi. Okay, so I'm going to do a little bit of psychology right now. He drew you a picture of the desert. I'm sorry to do this, but could the analogy be any clearer? He is the desert. He is the desert. That's how he feels. He can't use words. He can't necessarily use actions. Remember, at 7, there are many ways in which he can be 4. And 4-year-olds don't often show empathy. You know, for me, the theme song of being 4 is first, fastest, and best, right? I am Superman. And so he may not be able to show you that he feels bad. That doesn't mean he doesn't feel bad. And the fact that he drew you a picture of the desert indicates to me that he actually feels pretty bad. Not just about the computer, but he's not feeling great about himself as well. Hold on one second. Getting a message. The results are in. The results are in. So about the poll, so I want to share them. There were equal responses to the first three things. The question was, what helps you feel better about yourself? When I do an activity to do something that makes the situation better, I feel better about myself. When I'm reassured that what I did wasn't so bad, and when I can talk myself out of the distraction spiral. Okay, some people say when I feel paralyzed, I have to go for a hike, get out. I love that idea. I think that if you are feeling really bad about yourself or you're stuck, changing your environment, getting some blood flowing, having endorphins and adrenaline move through your system can really shift your mood. There's lots of research about that. I couldn't agree more. And the second question was, how has shame affected your daily life with ADHD? The top three answers were, I avoid doing things. I work hard not to disappoint people. I feel anxious about letting someone down. Thank you for sharing. These are all really important. Avoidance. I think we talked a little bit about motivation in another Facebook Live. I know we did. And that's something that we can always come back to. Perhaps in the future we can talk about disappointment, because I can see that it's already been 30 minutes. I can't believe it. 35 minutes. Avoiding disappointment is so deeply connected to shame. And so what happens with this not wanting to please people or make sure I don't disappoint people, it is inherently linked to anxiety. Because if you walk around worried that you're going to disappoint someone or let someone down or disappoint yourself, and you don't know when you're going to do it, you don't know how you're going to do it, you're not even sure what you've done that might mess up, but then you get the feedback that you messed up, you will live with anxiety, increasing amounts of anxiety. And so yes, we need reassurance from other people that what we did wasn't so bad, but we also have to figure out how to reassure ourselves, how to take perspective. And perhaps that's something I can talk about in a future Facebook Live. That's very difficult for people to do. And what I would encourage you to do in a moment when you're in a terrible shame spiral, if you can, write it out or talk it out into your phone, put it down, change your situation, change your environment, get out of where you are. If you can talk to someone who is in the situation with you, who might be able to help, reorient you or talk you down from the ceiling, that's useful. Maybe designate a friend or two who you can call when you're going down the drain and say, "Hey, I'm going down the drain. Can you remind me that I have resilience? Can you remind me that I'm a good person, or what are some of my strengths?" So we have a few more questions. Carrie says, I struggle with not being able to engage my brain when I need to work, and the harder I try, I get more anxious and the worse it gets. It feels like the brain shorts out. How do I work around that? I feel like things take me way too long, even though the work is quality in the end. So, initiation, engaging the brain, is something that's really challenging for pretty much everybody who has ADHD, and of course some folks who don't. One of the reasons that it's hard is that the task is just not that appealing, or it seems huge. You can't see yourself actually like getting anywhere. There's a chunk that no matter what you do, it's not small enough to actually feel a sense of accomplishment. So what I would encourage you to do is to really break your tasks down and start small. Once you feel like you're on a roll, once you feel a sense of accomplishment, you're more likely to keep going. Give yourself some breaks. It sounds like your brain gets tired. That's normal. Our brains need time to regroup and refuel, and we're spending a lot of time on screens right now, which is draining. It's something that used to feel like it would take an hour, might now take us 2 or 3 hours because we're just so tired. We have Zoom fatigue, we have computer fatigue. So make sure you budget little short energy breaks, bathroom, water, a snack and stretch, as they say, or a longer break in the middle of the day. I'm trying to walk every day in the middle of my day for 15 or 20 minutes just to shift. And that has been helping me in my concentration. I want to encourage you to download my free gift. See the link in the comments section. You can't stop anxiety. You can change your relationship to it. This is something that you follow the link and you can print out on your very own computer and read about how to reduce anxiety, which is, of course, the other side of shame. I'm going to take a few more questions. Renee says, my 5.5-year-old son has been seeing a behavior therapist for ADHD in which he was subjectively diagnosed. He has many meltdowns and cannot accept no for an answer, regardless of our consistent rules and expectations. We are always walking on eggshells. We are suspecting autism versus ADHD. How do we go about finding the difference? We are struggling to find help due to his age. Thank you. Renee, I'm so sorry to hear this. That sounds really challenging. You know, I don't know if you're aware of this, but 25% of kids who have ADHD are diagnosed with an autism spectrum disorder, and but it's not it, there's and it's a little bit different. 50% of kids who are on who have ASD are diagnosed with ADHD, and so that's interesting because it's not exactly how it's not there's not parity. So I think the important thing for you would be to find a pediatric neuropsychologist who could do a solid evaluation of your son that would include not just evaluating for ADHD but also for autism, and to make sure that that evaluation includes rating scales. Those are really important. You know, at 5.5, your son is probably much younger than his chronological age. He may be more like a 3-year-old, in which case he is going to have a lot of meltdowns. So I would encourage you to set some plans of what to do during those meltdowns. And not to walk on eggshells, but rather to expect and predict that he's going to have these meltdowns and create a program, maybe a few different options that you can rely on when he does. Okay, it's now 4:41. I'm going to go for 4 more minutes. This is clearly a big topic. Perhaps we should come back to it in the future. Jim asks another question. My husband said about changing her school and holding her back. He's so worried that she's behind in her academics. You know, Jim, again, I don't know your daughter, so it's hard for me to say. You said that her academics are okay. Changing schools is a possibility, but I feel like if she's so behind in her academics, the school system is not doing its job in offering her adequate support and scaffolding and services. And so that's the track I would go on. But changing school and starting in a different grade could be an option. Again, it's really a very personal decision. Kristen, I would love to further my education, but I'm so forgetful and academia has always been hard for me. So in terms of going on to graduate school, if that's something you want to do, or go to college, slow it down. Take one class at a time. You know, I worked with a brilliant woman, and she really could only take 2 classes at a time. She failed out of 3 colleges that made her take 4 classes at a time until she and I figured out she was a 2 class at a time person. Maybe you're a 1 class at a time person. That's fine. Figure out what works for you. Brenda says, through my 28 years of being married, my husband has made negative comments about me and what I have done around the house. During this sheltering, he's working from home. I can't get myself to do anything because I'm anticipating him saying something negative. Maybe he didn't mean his strong words, but it's all my mind thinks about. How do I get unstuck when my spouse has made me feel shameful? I would really encourage you to do some couples work, either find a couples counselor or an expert in couples. Melissa Orlov comes to mind. She offers courses for couples who are living with ADHD. Right now you're in a dynamic where you know anything your husband says you feel reactive to, you feel attacked by, and he probably is triggered by some of your actions or your forgetfulness or things that you don't do that aren't exactly how he would like. You've got to regroup, and you've got to regroup together as a couple. So I would really encourage you to seek out counseling. I think if your husband is resistant to that, there's nothing wrong with you getting help on your own. In fact, there's everything right with that. But I think it's also worth saying to him is, I would like us to be closer. I would like us to get along better. I'd like to feel more comfortable and safe in our marriage. I guess you would want that too. I think that means we might have to tweak some things. There's no shame in going to couples therapy. Nyla says, okay, they've not seen the doctor. School hasn't tested them. Nyla, if you suspect your kids have ADHD, then you want to make sure they get a proper diagnosis. And I'm not sure what that is where you live. It can be you can get testing through the school system. You can also speak to your pediatrician or primary care provider about options for diagnosis outside of the school system. And Ashley, this will be my last comment. Because my younger two do well in school but struggle at home with behavior and completing assignments, I cannot get an official diagnosis for them and therefore not able to get them as additional aids or medication. I was able to keep it together during school, so I slipped through the cracks until getting my diagnosis at 23. I don't want them to slip through the cracks. Of course you don't. So, so here's the thing. There is in the United States, I don't know where you live, Ashley, but if kids are spending, according to the IDEA, an excessive amount of time at home on homework or school-related responsibilities, and they're not necessarily showing problems at school, you can still qualify for a 504 accommodations. And I think that the other thing is that you can request to have your kids evaluated through a special ed evaluation, and that may start with a team meeting. But you have rights, and I think it's important wherever you live in the world, to find out what your rights are, what the rights are for students of disabilities, and of course for you as their parents. And if you need to get help enacting those rights, consider finding an educational advocate or someone who's experienced in this area. Perhaps you have a family member or a friend who's been through this. Find out what they did that helped them.